I know are coming in. Great. Good. Well, wonderful. We're at 11 o'clock right now, and I think I'll start my introductions and then we'll give plenty of time for our speakers and your questions in particular. We have a good, robust opportunity to have a really great conversation around a really pressing issue. Um, Thank you for joining us from wherever you are, from across the country, across the world. We're thrilled to kick off our annual gathering for 2025 with this pre-conference event, Rethinking Revolution. My name is John Kucich. I'm the president of the Thoreau Society, and uh, always an honor to be part of such a really robust society of people who have such incredibly thoughtful ways of engaging with the world. Let me start off with a couple thanks first to the annual gathering committee, Mark Sturgis, Beverly Pittman, Paul Schacht, Christy Ellis, and Dennis Nosen. Some folks are with us here for putting together a really tremendous annual gathering program, which we're very happy to start right now. It is a conference that is timely and powerful and a really representation of all that's best about the Thoreau Society. Thanks to Rebecca Migdal, our executive director, who has pulled this together and been flexible and imaginative and working with travel restrictions and visa snafus or not snafus, but um, other kinds of problems come up with in a way that really has adapted and made this a very rich event. She's at a 3-year-old's birthday party right now, so she can't join us. She's doing other important things. I want to thank Rich Picaretto, who is manning the technology here from Thoreau Farm. Rich, thank you again, and for all the great support you and all the staff do every day to make this organization work. And thanks to all of you for joining us from wherever you are. This is kind of the heart of what we do is gather and just engage in these conversations using Thoreau as a touchstone. To our panelists, thanks for coming in from all over the place. I'll introduce you in a moment. I'll note that Abdul Al-Abdali was very much hoping to join us. He was hoping to come in person. His plans were upended by a whole series of travel restrictions and visa restrictions, and so he emailed a week or so ago and said, "My life is in too much turmoil to pull together a presentation." So he sends his regrets, but his absence here is anything but a silence. It very much speaks to our moment, and we look forward to hearing from him as soon as we can. Um, we hope some of you were able to join us for the Thoreau Prize event last week with Robert McFarlane, where he touched on some of the issues we'll be talking about during this annual gathering and offered some really powerful, inspiring words. And we very much hope you can join us for the main annual gathering in a few weeks, either in person or online. And we're very excited to be able to offer pretty much the whole program online with our technology resources. So if you can't join us in person, which would be wonderful, we hope to have you join us for some or all of the AG virtually. That would be exciting. Rethinking Revolution is a title of this kickoff event, and the first of what will be many opportunities to think deliberately about the meaning of revolution in Thoreau's time and in ours. We chose the theme of revolution for our annual gathering last year, before last year, really, in order to connect with the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Lexington and Concord, both to participate in a major tourist event in Thoreau's hometown in Concord, and to complicate what exactly we're celebrating. As the signs that proliferated around town this season indicate, they include things like "Now it's our turn to fight tyranny" and "No kings then, no kings now." And as the nationwide protests take place today against the government's excesses of immigration enforcement and the military deployments, the question of revolution has taken on deep urgency indeed. Thoreau's legacy of principled protest and civil disobedience are as relevant as ever. It's important to remember that his view of revolution was never confined to mere politics. It reached out to include our ways of getting a living, our deepest beliefs, our relationships to everything in nature, human and more than human. Today, we're fortunate to have 3 Thoreau Society members from across the country and the world to help us rethink revolution. I'll introduce them all together. Each will share their work for about 15 minutes. They all have slideshows they can share with us. And that will leave plenty of time for questions and conversation. Please hold your questions until after all 3 have presented. Then you can either post your questions in the chat or raise your hand using the Zoom function. And we'll happily try to engage with everybody here. Um, I'll introduce our guests in the order in which they speak. Carol Maciel's presentation is Untarnished Successions, Henry David Thoreau's Revolutionary Stance Towards Human Perpetuity. Carol holds an undergraduate degree in education and is now working on her master's in divinity through an online program at Starr King School for the Ministry. She's contributed to scholarship on Thoreau, Emerson, the Reverend William Ellery Channing, and also serves as a Unitarian Universalist lay preacher. She joins us today from Brazil. Nikita Pokorvsky's presentation is What It Means to Lose Your Motherland, a look at the Thoreau crisis from today's perspective. Nikita, I hope, is known to almost all of us. He holds a doctorate degrees in both history, in the history of philosophy and in sociology. He's written several books on American culture, including studies of Thoreau, on Emerson, and on Puritanism, and on broader topics in sociology, including the problem of anomie and several studies of tourism. He has served as a leader of both Russian and international sociological organizations, a lifetime member of the Henry David Thoreau Society since 1978. Nikita is a recipient of the Society's 2014 Walter Harding Distinguished Achievement Award. In 1989, he became the first person from Russia to be accepted as a fellow at the National Humanities Center in North Carolina, and in 2004, he was a Fulbright Research Scholar at Indiana University Northwest. Currently, as the head of a group of leading Russian social scientists, he's maintaining a longitudinal interdisciplinary research on cellular globalization, environmental humanities, and local economies of rural communities in the north of Russia. And he joins us from Russia today. And finally, Carol Graham is with us. She's logged in under my Zoom link, and so her name says John Kucich. She's very much not me. She grew up in the Rocky Mountains on a ranch in Montana, riding her horse Whimperduke and herding cattle. She's surrounded by the quiet and calmness of nature. These experiences continue to provide the backdrop for her journey through life today, and she's joining us from the very northwest tip of Idaho. So thank you all of you for sharing your work with us today, and we'll start with Carol Maciel. So Carol, if you'll share your screen, um, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks for helping with the presentation. So in this talk, we'll explore Thoreau's ideas regarding humanity and its possibilities concerning marriage, family, and reproduction, especially the circumstances that, according to him, would validate such processes in contrast with a mindless propagation of the human species. In order to achieve this, I will revisit some excerpts from his works, mainly journal entries and essays. And yes, Thoreau's name may not be the first to come to mind when someone thinks of a philosophical critique of marriage, but his interesting remarks carry the same patterns of the call for deliberation and self-culture that appear in Walden and basically all of his work. Before turning to Thoreau's own words, I want to speak briefly about a phenomenon known as ecological succession. This is one of the oldest
Carol,
concepts.
your screen is not yet shared, so if we'd
It's because I needed
you're
you to
not there
share.
yet.
No, it's because I needed you to share because I
Oh,
was
I'm
having
sorry. I
some
beg your pardon.
trouble.
You're exactly right. Thank you. I got distracted.
It's in the chat.
Yep. No, I have it. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
And then again, on ecological succession, this is one of the oldest concepts in the field of ecology, and traditional readings of it are now seen as somewhat outdated by some specialists who are redefining it with more nuance. So succession refers to the process by which communities progressively change and eventually replace one another after external interference, whether natural or man-made. So from a fire started by human action to a volcanic eruption. In this classic interpretation, replacement happens until climax is reached within the ecosystem, taking the form, for instance, of a mature forest which enjoys a relatively stable ecological state until the next interference occurs and the cycle begins once again. In this way, each element of that community creates conditions that later allow other communities of plants, animals, and fungi to develop and hopefully thrive. Living beings display such a diversity of needs and inclinations. While trees have their own diversity, such as different levels of sensitivity to sunlight or a myriad of leaf shapes serving various functions, humans also reflect such diversity through our wide array of interests, identities, occupations, ideals, and so on. Relatively recently, ecology has started to revisit the idea of succession, surpassing a more rigid sense of linearity and predictability that was present in earlier interpretations. Contemporary understandings of succession tend not to give much emphasis to a linear progression toward climax and ecological stability, but rather include more fluid, less predictable cycles, where living beings have more flexible roles, participation, functions, and relationships. The other key concept is that of nurse plant and the facilitation they offer. It happens when one species, in a way, prepares the ground for another species during the process of ecological succession, adapting the environmental conditions, and enhancing the survival of the species that will later benefit from it. An example would be a tree with a large canopy, producing shade or lowering the temperature of that part of the ecosystem, helping meet the needs of the more vulnerable species that would struggle otherwise. Understanding how succession unfolds in a variety of environments, shaping different ecological communities, is essential and has a generative potential. It can help, for example, in restoring forests damaged by human activity. And in a similar way, exploring the politics of human relationships can contribute to discussions and actions that counter the repetition of oppressive patterns, deeply rooted in this inescapable topic. I invite you here to consider contemplating marriage and all its repercussions as potential analogies within appropriate limits to ecological succession and interspecies facilitation, partially inspired by the way Thoreau understood his observations of nature. Thoreau wrote an essay called Chastity and Sensuality, and it offers reflections on relationships, sexuality, and reproduction. After several paragraphs proposing temperance and mutual encouragement of a sense of discipline in relationships, including within marriage, he writes that the continuing of the human species in what he calls true marriage should not be a goal, but rather a complement. Beyond questioning the conforming view that understood reproduction as the teleological aspect of marital life, subjecting men and especially women to paths shaped by child raising, Thoreau ends his essay using a language that can even resemble a form of romanticized eugenics, but still gives food for thought. He wrote, "Some people have asked whether men cannot be improved, whether they might not be bred like cattle. Let love be purified, and all else will follow. Pure love is therefore truly the panacea for all the world's ills. The only excuse for reproduction is improvement. Nature abhors repetition. Beasts merely propagate their kind, but the offspring of noble men and women will be superior to themselves, as their aspirations are. By their fruits you shall know." Thoreau was thinking beyond convenience. Even when the social landscape could have offered him, in addition to extra financial responsibilities, also privilege related to property and the organization of domestic life. The Thoreauvian inspiration in critiquing marriage has some limitations, of course. In a time prior to the development of effective contraceptive methods, any relationship that allowed for sexual activity automatically posed a threat to one's agency over various aspects of life, and often required a greater degree of subjection to the rising demands of industrialization through work and consumption. As a polymath who valued his time and freedom and could afford to work more or less on his own terms, perhaps his refusal to see the female body as automatically instrumental to reproduction was at least partly a positive side effect of his personal aspirations. Marriage was convenient for men, but to what extent and to which expressions of masculinity? Indeed, men could buy property and vote by paying taxes, but Thoreau, who never voted, never married, and refused to pay the poll tax, chose a way of living so contemplative that even the privilege granted to both single and married men could be somewhat interpreted as burdens. And for married men, gender norms also dictated the need for more stable, full-time employment, limiting the possibility of experimental efforts and creative expression. It does not mean by any stretch that he did not enjoy male privilege, but rather the supposed advantages of married life would pale in comparison to the adventure of bachelorhood and childlessness. In any case, I interpret Thoreau's position as a reminder that questioning, and perhaps, dare I say, improving institutions like marriage and family, has the potential to benefit all humankind, regardless of gender and sexual orientation. When Thoreau tried to envision heterosexual love beyond conventional boundaries,
Yes.
he made some attempts.
What's that? Oh, yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Having a good time.
Likewise. Yes, it's good. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Carol, is this the right slide for you?
Next one.
Next one. Great.
One example was his exploration of medieval-inspired courtly love traditions, as he pondered alternative models of engagement with the feminine, something that transcended the norms of marriage. In doing so, perhaps without full awareness, he pointed towards forms of relationship that could challenge normativity. This resembles what might be considered today flirting with the idea of a queer experience of heterosexuality, or perhaps even an early exploration of what is now understood as the relationships within the asexual spectrum. So he wrote in his journal, the history of chivalry and knighthood does not suggest or point to any other relation with women that then leads to marriage, yet an elevating and all-observing one, perchance transcending marriage. As yet men know not one another, nor does man know woman. I'm sure that the design of my Maker when he has brought me nearest to woman was not the propagation, but rather the maturation of species. Man is capable of a love of woman quite transcending marriage. The experience of being deeply affected by the friendship with a woman for Thoreau could be just as fruitful as a marital relationship. In addition to imagining possibilities for marriage that could surpass normativity, he also wrote about the potential of living without going through marriage or reproduction at all. In the next journal entry, Thoreau kept on musing about the diversity of nature's generative processes. He concludes by quoting a passage from a book chapter by Louis Agassiz to illustrate the alternative ways in which relationships of creation, reverberation, and care can take place. In the psychological world, there are phenomena analogous to what zoologists call alternating reproduction, in which several different generations are needed to produce the perfect animal. The life of some men is nothing but an aspiration, a yearning towards a higher state, and they are completely misunderstood until they are seen or traced through all their metamorphoses. We cannot pass judgment on the intellectual and moral state of a man until he can foresee what metamorphosis he is preparing for. You can pass to the next slide. Thank you. They say that worker bees are sterile females. Their attributes of their sex seems to consist solely in their concern for the well-being of the next generation, of which they are the natural guardians, but not the progenitors. This phenomenon has a parallel in humans with unmarried aunts and uncles who perform a similar function. The effective and pedagogical interactions that transcend the limits of the nuclear family are proposed by Thoreau as valid and necessary paths for the continuation of the human species. Emerson's son, Edward Emerson, next slide, wrote an essay about growing up in the companionship of Thoreau during his childhood and teenage years. The book ends by stating that Thoreau, but both in life and after death, has helped Edward throughout his life, echoing the idea of facilitation between plants and other species. The optimism and praise for human potential can be seen also as theological fruits of Thoreau's Unitarian social context and underlying theology. They offer the outline of a vision of family grounded not in expiation of sin through pregnancy or in a national demographic duty, but in the belief in the potential for the multiplication of affection, care, and wisdom. For Thoreau, the condition for the validity of sex would be its status as the climax of mutual self-cultivation in a relationship, rather than a social or biological expectation to be fulfilled by each and every person necessarily. The tarnish of sex and consequently of human succession would not be the indulgence in the act itself, but the waste of the chance to experience it deliberately. Considering the global nature of the climate crisis and late-stage capitalism, and on a more positive note, the growing legal recognition of different family configurations, Thoreau's position on marriage, family, and reproduction offer a rich ground for reflection on the ethics of care, discussions on antinatalism, and eco-criticism, revealing the parallel of ecological complexity in human diversity. And now moving to our last slide. In Walden, he wrote, I desired that there may be as many different persons in the world as possible, but I would have each one be very careful to find out and pursue his own way, and not his father or his mother's or his neighbors instead. The youth may build or plant or sell, only let him not be hindered from doing that which he tells me he would like to do. So, concluding, biological processes, nature, and ideas about family and the care of offspring can be harnessed in the name of a reproductive normativity that excludes and oppresses diversity. But they can also be revisited, revealing possible strategies for a gentler handling of the crisis currently faced by humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful, Carol. Thank you so much. And again, we'll take questions after all three presentations. And next, we'll turn to Nikita. You can share your screen and get started. Look forward to hearing from you.
Just one moment. Okay. Let me.
Okay, we see your slides.
Yeah. Can you see my slides?
Yep, if you can, there we go. That's perfect. Great.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. I'm very pleased and very fortunate to be with you. And let me say that my paper is mostly dedicated to social issues and moral issues from the perspective of today. Okay, so Henry Thoreau is always astonishingly topical. Therein lies his secret and his mystery. Over the years, this idea has become more and more ingrained in me. When reading and rereading his text, some of his thoughts are involuntarily tied exclusively to his historical epoch. They are the reflections of his time, and only that. The paradox of Thoreau, however, is that these purely historical passages of his thoughts are of a sudden acquire a tremendous topicality over time, as if they had been written by our living contemporary for us and only for us. They are more topical than any article in the New York Times today. It is a kind of astonishing Thoreau paradox. Many times in my life, beginning in my distant university years, I have read a fragment from Slavery in Massachusetts that everyone knows. Let me quote it again. I have lived for the last month with a sense of having suffered a vast an indefinite loss. I did not know at first what ailed me. At last it occurred to me that what I had lost was a country, So, well, I thought, these vivid and emotional words were spoken by Thoreau in 1854 in response to the Fugitive Slave Act, which outraged many people. Well, yes, losing one's own country is indeed a powerful metaphor, but in fact, from a political perspective and strict rationality, it has little relevance today, I thought. Now, how can you lose your own country while remaining in your own country? This is difficult to understand and imagine. Historically, it was possible to understand Thoreau, but it was little, but it had little relevance for today. After all, what is my own country? Let us talk a little bit about this. What is my own country? What does it mean not figuratively, but deliberately, from our perspective? Is it simply geography of your own country, physical dimensions of the continent, its open spaces, or is it beauty of nature of your country, or the melodical sound of your native language, your cultural heritage, or history, or people, population, countrymen, or perhaps you have a special mental affiliation with your state and government, who knows? Is it all in my own country? Is it all what is my own country? Yes, that's exactly what it is. I think my country was that for Thoreau, and this is what's for him too, and generally remains that for us today. So how can it be lost? This is a kind of very interesting question. What exactly and how exactly can it be lost? As the years went by, however, I had fewer and fewer questions for Thoreau about losing a country. So let us make a list of losses and quickly characterize them. Not all of them, but at least some of them. First, geography. A big country from sea to sea. How can a person lose his sense of vastness and belonging to the vastness of space? How can you or a person can travel almost freely from ocean to ocean, and everything around him or you is yours. It belongs to you, at least psychologically, I mean mentally. It is the deepest feeling of being embedded in space and belonging to it. It is, so to say, my country. And Thoreau, in his few but deeply reflected travels on the continent, had fully experienced it. But how can one lose it? That's a good question. It seems that the sense of the immensity of your geography space begins to wane, to fade, and lose significance for you. This is the process of losing your geography. It becomes simply not interesting and not meaningful and therefore simply lost. Nature. This is a particular subject of great significance for Thoreau. One might say that his entire philosophy was devoted to turning to nature for help in resolving the moral conflicts of his contemporary society. Nature, whole and pure water lily, from the same essay, Slavery in Massachusetts, is a beacon of salvation and rebirth. And once again, we ask the question, how can this be lost? This sense, this feeling, this emotional state of mind. It turns out, but it is possible. The beauty and perfection of nature and landscape are covered little by little by the haze of the blurred screen for you. Yes, nature is still beautiful, but it is about another life, and it exists on another planet, not yours. One page of Thoreau's writing, we find much evidence of this ambivalence, and nature, alas, potentially adds to this list of our losses. The immortal Thoreau's Walden experiment was in part, or in its greater part, about resolving this collision. Language, culture, history, can they be lumped together in one category of loss? I think in this case, they can be lumped together. The mother language loses its charm and its magic of communication. Silence becomes the prevailing formula of self-reflection. Come to mind again, Walden. It gives birth to the same dramatic question: why did countless generations live and die if everything is covered with what we have, without teaching anyone anything? People. This is a complex, very complex subject, perhaps the most complex. To say that people around you are fake people, that they are uneducated and do not understand the order of things, all this is partly true, but only partly. Snobbery does not lead to a positive solution of life's conflict. After all, you are just like them by your nature. You are one of them. On the other hand, losing a country is an unexplicable loss of interest in a mob of obedient, consenting citizens around you. And you cannot force yourself to love those in whom you have no interest. Thoreau responded with a philosophy of civil disobedience. Above all, however, he tended towards escapism, loneliness, and solitude, which is unavoidably one such a case. And that's what losing the country is all about, is it? Government, state, power, violence. These four marvelous substances, government, state, power, and violence, are always with us, and there is no way of escaping them. Peter Kropotkin created a wonderful anarchist utopia about how to live without those substances. Thoreau did not have known this utopia from Kropotkin because of chronological reasons, but nor could he have been known Leo Tolstoy's utopia, but he came very close to them. He responded to the pressure of the state with a philosophy of civil disobedience, and we know very well that what it is, but what is the pressure on the part of the state. But the question involuntarily arises as to whether Thoreau's civil disobedience is an act of resolving social conflicts, or, I make a special emphasis on that, an act of the emotional explosion of protest, an act of unreflected self-purification in protest. This question has been answered differently in different eras. Each answer did not exclude the loss of one's own country. So the basic component of losing one's country are there. It remains to try to solve the main question: what to do if the loss of one's country becomes a realized fact rather than a purely philosophical construction. It is desirable to do it, and the spirit of Thoreau himself is very practical. We need to find how to do it. So there are basically two paths and ways what can be done. The first way Okay, sorry. The first way to continue life under the laws of one's own country is the path of immigration or exile. Human history is full of examples of attempts to leave the lost land. For Thoreau, this seemed neither possible nor productive. Why, by the way? That's a good question. I don't recall Thoreau's specific judgments on the subject. Most likely, he realized that implanting himself in an alien environment abroad and the external social environment will be always alien by definition, would not be a productive solution to the problem. For example, even if someone reaches a very high level of the progress abroad, being in exile, it does not bring, I believe, does not bring full life, full happiness. In the Russian list of exceptions, we find classical names such as Vladimir Nabokov, Sergei Rachmaninoff, Ivan Bunin, Peterin Sorokin, Joseph Brodsky, name only the forefronters. However, it is not a fact that liberation and external prosperity in exile made them quite happy, quite happy. So, just to make a long story short, there is the second part, the second way, the second path. It is the path of inner immigration, a kind of escape into oneself while sometimes remaining anchored in a hostile external environment. This is where Thoreau's name begins to shimmer with a certain meaning. It is a path of escape into oneself, accommodated by seclusion, alienation, self-isolation, loneliness. These phenomena are by no means synonymous. However, they are often not mutually exclusive, but complementary. This is where Thoreau's well-known one-man revolution finds its ground. Arguments in favor of this inner immigration can be found in London, where we can see an indigenous sketched and reasoned path from the outer to the inner, from the alien outer substance to a truly inner self. However, Thoreau is characterized by ability to play the keyboard of subliminal variations, but in one case, Walden is a variant of escapism, and it is hard not to see and recognize this. I'm sorry, something is wrong. And let me conclude my presentation, but by saying everything I have said about Thoreau can be easily projected on our reality. It is a part of our life, and it is a part of what is happening, regardless of what country we represent, and regardless of the continent in which we live. So even today, everywhere in the world, on both sides of the ocean, we can see the examples of what I was described talking about Thoreau. I hope this is the end of my presentation, and just to give you my final comment on in the screen, you can see on the right side, you can see the replica of Thoreau hidden in the middle of Russia, in the north of Russia, the Kostroma region, where our expedition takes place. We just built it. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nikita. That was really thoughtful and full of great ideas. And yeah, thank you for sharing. If you could
Thank
stop
you. Thank you.
If you could stop sharing your screen, we'll move to Carol. That'd be wonderful too. Great. Thank you. And then finally, Carol Graham, who will appear on a screen that has a box that has my name in it, but it really is Carol Graham. Carol, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can. And if you can share your
Okay.
screen,
Yes.
we'll jump right in.
Can everybody see that?
Not yet.
Okay, hold on.
Oh, some can. There we go. Perfect.
Okay. And before I get started here, I just want, can everybody hear me? Sorry. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, John. Thanks for answering. I wanted to say, John, excellent overall opening statement. I love that. Oh, your opening introduction was just great. Nikita, oh my gosh, what an excellent presentation. And Carol, you have some really important things that I'm especially your climate. Showing this from stone and the evolution to trees. Oh, that was magnificent. So I just wanted to say that to everybody. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to learn about Henry David Thoreau. Have you ever had anyone ask you the question, why should I learn about Thoreau? For me, this question comes from my high school students. Dr. Graham, why is Thoreau important? Why do we have to learn about Thoreau? And I add that tone because that's how they say it to me. Ask me that question. I share this background with you because reflecting on Thoreau's life and legacy has greatly enriched my own life and the engagement and critical thinking of my students. That being said, my goal and desire is for this presentation today, hope is that it opens the door for you to want to ask the question throughout your day. How would Thoreau think about this? My presentation today focuses on Thoreau's affinity for nurturing all living things. Thoreau's life, thought, reflections, and actions were documented throughout his entire life by himself in his own writings, drawings, surveying, sketches, and much more in his diaries. I have used Thoreau's own writings, quotes, and reflections throughout the examples I want to share with you today. And all four examples I selected demonstrate Thoreau's curiosity to understand, interact, and reflect upon each circumstance with empathy and kindness. And the first slide that you see here is a picture from 1854. It's on the cover of his most famous book, Walden. And the quote under it is from Thoreau. And what it probably one of the most important quotes he has because he lived this life. It reads, with respect to luxuries and comforts, the wisest have ever lived a more simple, meager life than the poor. And especially the last part. He tried to live as best he could as a simple life. And I'll go about talking more about that later. So the four selections are to just summarize them, and then I'll go into them in more detail. The first one is Thoreau was as a naturalist. I mean, definitely he believed that that a greater understanding of our life on earth was a deeper understanding of the natural world around us in which we are immersed in. Does everybody see the picture of the cabin? Thoreau wrote in his book Walden, we can never have enough nature. He described the location of his tiny cabin on Walden Pond shoreline, 1 mile from the village of Concord and 2 miles south of Concord battlefield approximately. And he described it in his journal as saying, where I lived, beginning July 4th, 1845, was as far off as many a region viewed nightly by astronomers. So I want you to take a look at this replica. After Thoreau left Walden Pond from his cabin, again, this is a replica. The reason it's a replica is because it took the community a little bit after his death to think, well, maybe we should get together and rebuild that because there basically was nothing left. And there's enough people still alive that kind of knew, that had visited him at Walden Pond, and so they knew what was inside his little cabin. The meagerness is emphasized here. He had a table, he had a chair, he had a bed. You could see up here the chimney, you know, I don't know, I haven't found anything, they have that back here, but I don't really know if that was the um, wood part shed there was built at the same time, but it would make sense. He had a chimney, burnt wood. The cabin was approximately 10 feet by 15 feet long. It's really important here to look at this doorstep here because a lot of stuff happens there. He would sit there and watch the wildlife. And he remarks on his first day of living in his cabin, beginning July 4th, 1845. He describes where I lived. It was as far off as many a region viewed nightly by astronomers. And I want you to picture that because he's only like, you know, a mile from, you know, the village, not that far. But that's the way he thought. He wrote, "We are wont to imagine rare and delectable places in some remote, more celestial corner of the system." Thoreau spoke of living at this little cabin site as equal remoteness from the life he had left behind at the age of 27. And on that day, he scribbled down a 4-line poem that I want to read to you really quickly. It says, "There was a shepherd that did and held his thoughts as high as were the mounts whereon his flocks did hourly feed him by." And by reading that little short poem there, he also wrote poems throughout his journals. So I didn't even emphasize and do a specific thing on Thoreau's love of poetry, but that too. He also loved poetry and wrote poetry. So the next slide. So it's important to remember here on this area here, because this is also the area for several other things I'm going to mention here. This next slide here is on the left is a drawing of a red squirrel. He woke up one day in that cabin and in his tiny cabin there to write in his journal that he would regularly do. And he noticed that a pine cone he had brought inside a couple of days ago was now fully open. And I'll talk about that in a second here. So this drawing is, of course, Thoreau's on the left from his journal, a sketch of a red squirrel. And I went ahead and put this the squirrel on the right hand side that's in color. In fact, it's a color picture of red squirrel pictured in the New England Quarterly, not drawn by Thoreau, but I wanted to show this picture so you would have the image in your mind of all the details, and particularly look at the position the squirrel is in, so on and so forth. And then picture Thoreau sitting on that doorstep looking at the different things the squirrels were doing. So he woke up and he recalled that the pine cone that he had gathered to keep inside to give to the squirrels, along with corn that he grew and things like that. He woke up and he rotated the thorny pine cone in his hands, and several seeds dropped to the floor. And then he meditated how the red squirrels are naturally equipped with their teeth in dealing with these thorny pine cones. So I have firsthand experience with this. On the left-hand side here, you can see that these thorns that are really sharp, kind of very nasty to touch. And then you can see the closed pine cones that, again, were really hard to find. Now it's the mid-June, but you can imagine Thoreau uh, rotating that around in his pine cone around, and then dealing with the thorny pine cones. And he wrote, "A person has locked up in his chest the keys, just like the squirrel," I added that part, "the sensitivity and sympathy to other living beings." And he wrote in his diary, he had not yet met a philosopher who could show him how any different we are between a man and a fish, or a squirrel in this case. We are so much alike. So I just wanted to show you that. So these are closed because the heat in the cabin, apparently, this is what Thoreau determined, had opened them up, as you see there. And I have one here. I'll show it to you. So here's one right here, and you can see real close up the little knobs or thorns on there, very sharp. And then this is a closed one. That the only reason it's closed and I can show it to you today, and if you see, look at the bottom, it's starting to open. I've been having this out into the heat of the house here for a couple hours, and I can see it's already opening the next layer. So just to let you know, had to elicit my husband to help out, and we ended up putting it in the refrigerator, and almost had to resort to the freezer. But just to talk to you a little bit about that. Good experiment to do um, with children, your kids, and even adults might not realize that. The next thing I wanted to talk about real quickly is Thoreau's compassion as an activist, and a lot of people don't know this. He and his family for quite some time were active in the Underground Railroad. Thoreau's theme of having sympathy and sensitivity for all living things is a common thread in his writings. As a dedicated activist, he held a meeting in his cabin on Walden Pond, working with compassion in others, including his family and some of the townspeople, to help the enslaved flee northward to escape slavery. And in this essay, you see on the slide, Slavery in Massachusetts, July 4th, 1854, Thoreau wrote prolifically against slavery. And he says, what I am concerned to know is that man's influence and authority were on the side of the slaveholder and not the slave, of the guilty and not the innocent, of injustice and not of justice. And he continues, much has been said about American slavery, but I think that we do not even yet realize what slavery is. He abhorred the fugitive slave law, and he wrote, the law will never make men free. It is men who've got to make the law free. And so the last uh, selected example, was about rocks. I like that chart that Carol had in her presentation. She actually showed exactly, I didn't even have that. And Carol, with your permission, I'd love to include it. But she had a chart that where Thoreau thought rocks were the foundation of everything. And he found himself one day at Lee's Cliff in the Walden Woods on a stormy day in May 30th, 1857. As Thoreau is sheltering under the rock from the rain, he says he looked out at the pond with new eyes, writing, I have never been there before. Ordinarily, we make haste from all opportunities to be where we have instinctively endeavored to get. And he goes on to talk about the stone cliff. The stone in general becomes his house, stating, this is his quote, I inhabited it. Thinking to himself, writing, I think that such a projecting like this, the stone cliff, Lee's Cliff, or a cave is the only effectual protection that nature affords us against the storm. And as he hunkers down, he sings the song Tom Bowling. And Tom Bowling, it was a very famous, well, it's actually a sailor's epithet. They still famous today. It's about a sailor lost at sea. So I want to play that for you. Oops, let me stop it. Hold on. There we go.
Here a sheer-hulk lies poor Tom Bowling, the darling of our crew. No more he'll hear the tempests howling, for death hath broached him to. His form was of the manliest beauty, his heart was kind and soft. Faithful below Tom did his duty, and now he's gone
want you to imagine, you can do this with your children, your adults, people around you. Just imagine being sheltered under a rock, and he just opens up in song. I think I'll sing. Thoreau loved singing, and he actually wrote a quote in the bottom right after he finished singing. In the woods, under the rock, in the rain, the dampness seemed to be favorable to my voice. Just imagine that. He had strong feelings about rocks his entire life. After returning from the 1846 exploration of Maine, he summarized his experience in Maine, noted in the book, The Guide to Walden Pond. Not that guide, but I'll tell you about this one. This one is from Robert Thorson. But he noted in that, he says that, a quote, that all of our life in nature boils down to rock, the solid earth, the actual world, the common sense. His house foundation was of stone, the minerals of the soil that grew the timber walls of his home, the minerals in the water to give him the strength to raise his axe. Thoreau noted all came from stone, and he wrote, there's nothing inorganic. And in closing today, my presentation, I've shared with you 4 concrete, insightful examples based on Thoreau's journal notes and quotes, demonstrating Thoreau's affinity for nurturing living things. Through his profound curiosity, experimentation, and reflection, Thoreau set an example for himself of living a simple and meager life. Perhaps all of us should follow his example of shunning the materialistic matters and focus on living simply. Thank you for your attention today, and please share Thoreau's ideas. Do these experiments that I've talked about in the insights with your children, students, and others. We need more Thoreau. Even though Thoreau lived meagerly, his life was rich. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carol. That was wonderful. And thanks to all 3 presenters for being so thoughtful and being on time. It made my job much easier. So please, at this point, let's engage in the wider conversation. If you have questions for Carol M. or for Nikita or for Carol G., you can post them in the chat or raise your hand using the little Zoom reaction button. And we'll look forward to a rich conversation. We have until 12:30 Eastern Time. We'll give folks a moment. Rich Schneider, please. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I wanted to say hi to my good friend Nikita, and thank you for his talk. And I can simply say amen to what he's saying. There are so many people losing their countries right now, including us apparently with our parade today. And so his comments are right on target. I don't have a question, just an affirmation of what he was saying. Thank you, Nikita.
Sure. Thank you, Dick. Thank you very much.
Other questions for the chat?
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Comment. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm not sure who I'm calling on, but
This is Joe.
Oh, Joe, thank you very much. Yeah, jump in, please.
This is for Carolina. I have always thought there was a connection between Thoreau and Thornton Wilder. And I did a little research. I found out that he actually wrote a commencement speech in 1952 for Oberlin College. Wilder did, called Wrestling with Thoreau. And I want to read something from his beautiful play, Our Town, that I think supports Carolina's contention, and maybe she can comment on it. It's a quote from the stage manager / minister, and he said, "The real hero of this scene isn't on the stage at all." Speaking of the marriage between George and Emily, and you know who that is. It's like what one of those European fellows said. Every child born into the world is nature's attempt to make a perfect human being. Well, we've seen nature pushing and contriving for some time now. We all know that nature's interested in quantity, but I think she's interested in quality too. That's why I'm in the ministry. And don't forget all the other witnesses at this wedding, the ancestors, millions of them. Most of them set out to live two by two, also millions of them. So I think this supports, Carolina, what your contention is with Thoreau, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you too. I'm not a Wilder scholar as you are, but I do see a similarity. And thank you for introducing me to our town. Um, it's very relevant, and I am yet to learn more about them. And also, the Wrestling with Thoreau article is something that I would have never learned about if it wasn't for Joe. So thank you. I don't have much to add about it, but I appreciate it.
I just want to make the point that I think that what Thornton Wilder was trying to say is that we're trying to achieve through a spiritual relationship children of oneness, spiritual oneness, transcendental oneness. Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you. Well, I'll throw a question out as people are kind of gathering their thoughts here, and I'm struck by the presence of loss and revolution in both Carolina's and Nikita's presentation. That sense of climate and the anxiety around this world that we're afraid of losing in terms of a sustainable environment and the natural kin that we have. And then for Nikita, particularly that sense of a loss of our country as definitional. And I think our hope of revolution was forward-looking, hopeful, programmatic. But I wonder if you can talk about the role of loss in shifting Thoreau's thinking and shifting our own thinking towards what comes next. And certainly, I think Carol G can jump in on that too. I'm thinking of his efforts to go to Thoreau's efforts to go to Walden Pond as a response to his real failure to make it as a writer in New York City, for example. He comes home kind of with his tail between his legs and not sure what to do next. He's lost that avenue. Um, could you all three speak about the role loss plays in this turn
I,
towards revolution?
I, um, John, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I, well, when Thoreau was in Harvard, Emerson was already established in Concord. And he had a classmate. I don't know if he's the classmate, we'll just call it might have been a roommate. But the roommate said to him, and he remembered it, and he actually put it down in his journal. He said, I just would like to have a small place, a small place in where I could just sit and think. And Thoreau remembered what that classmate said to him. So I just want to throw that out there. I don't know if that influenced why he went to the woods or whatever, but there's a couple really traumatic events that happened to Thoreau just before he went to the woods. And anybody can please jump in, and if you can to share anything you can add to this about this. But I've wondered on those events that happened to him before he went into the woods. There's two big things. His brother had passed away, and his livelihood. He thought when he came out of Harvard, he wanted to teach, and he did teach. But it was very short-lived because the master teacher at the time, or overseer, we call them principals now and this kind of thing, but the overseer thought his classroom was always a mess. It was unruly. Kids were getting in trouble. There was misbehavior, so on and so forth. So he was reprimanded. Here, you can imagine, he comes out of Harvard. His goal is to be a teacher. And he ends up being a teacher, but not like what he was putting himself in. He teaches, and he's getting reprimanded because he's his classroom's a mess, misbehavior, so on and so forth. So he teaches there. I think it was like the next day he decides to actually do the corporal punishment, which is punishing a kid physically. And he was so disgusted with how that made him feel, and that he quit that. In fact, his brother, before he passed away, started a school. And he and his brother started probably, and they even make reference to the first, possibly the first Montessori school, which if anybody knows about, I'm in education, so I know all about it. It's you want to do, you touch and affect students by sight, things having to do with sight, listening opportunities, textural opportunities. You probably could see that from my presentation. You know, song opportunities, poetry opportunities, walking in the woods, so on and so forth. So he and his brother actually, he went down the river in a canoe and had experiences with his students. They started their own school, so they had freedom to teach how they wanted to teach. But after his brother passed away, it wasn't much longer after that where he talked to Emerson. Emerson gave him the property for him then to build the cabin. So I don't know. Those are some pretty, when you lose a job, it's considered to be one of a very, even now, usually it's significant. And so, and then he loses his brother, and that's pretty rapid succession. So I'd be interested if people could add to that.
Carol or Nikita, do you want to add on the role loss plays in this revolution in thinking?
Yeah. When I think about loss and grieving, and the topic of my talk, I think about how generations approach such milestones like buying property, getting married or not, and realizing that there is some loss when you realize that the material conditions did not really allow you to fulfill such milestones, and you start to think of what really matters to you regardless of the social conventions. So even for the millennial generation or the Gen Z generation, which I'm part of, I'm sort of in the cusp between these two, there is some grief about the things that we were supposed to do and the fear about climate change. But in all of that, there's also the hope in realizing that even if you're not a mother, or father, or parent, even if I'm not physically in Concord, which is something I'm also grieving, there is still a way to contribute, right? And I think Thoreau was a great example of that, of being awake and being alive and just making the best of his situation, the death of his brother, and all the deforestation and all the challenges he faced. There was some generative energy, even in what can look like it's barren. There's something beautiful there. That's what I grasp from it. And that's the inspiration I gathered from his life, especially because I got to know Thoreau when I was 22. And it was a huge influence. So yeah, turning loss into something beautiful as much as you can.
Great. Thank you. Nikita, do you want to add to that? I was really struck by your comments around Thoreau having this expensive loss, and you're not sure where he lands on this question.
Uh, yes, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what was and could be Thoreau's position. Uh, I'm just making my personal reflections on what he could think of it. But from my personal perspective, I would say it's a big issue of losing your own country. It's a trauma. It's a huge trauma because and there are, as I said in my presentation, there are just two ways to deal with it. Either you leave your country and you go to exile and you are a sort of alien and you put yourself in the context of an alien culture, no matter how you're well introduced to that culture, but nevertheless it's alien to you. And this is very important. So, and the other way is to stay in the country and being a part of the absolutely hostile social media, social environment in your country. And the question is, what was Thoreau's resolution of this dilemma? On the one hand, he was a revolutionary, a one-man revolutionary, and that's what he did. in his life. But on the one hand, and I may be well wrong, my understanding is that the Walden experiment is a wonderful, so to say, instruction to people how to stay in the country and to escape from the influence of the hostile environment in your own country. In this way, you lose your country, but you preserve yourself uh, for posterity, maybe, or for the future, or for your family. It varies, it depends. So, in this sense, there is only, I think, one alternative of losing your country, or staying or leaving. But you know, but I think that the both ways, both variants are very dramatic in many ways.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm struck by reading Thoreau in this particular moment as someone who certainly engaged in the social milieu of his time. He certainly spoke out against slavery. He helped self-emancipated people move on towards freedom. But he also was not as engaged as some of his very close circle was. He wasn't like Franklin Sanborn, um, one of the Secret Six. He wasn't storming the doors of the Boston courthouse trying to free Anthony Burns or others. There's a sense that he felt like perhaps this kind of direct political action is not his best role, um, but he still felt engaged. So I'm struck by how to read his politics in this moment, and that sense of I'm going to turn and really study deeply the natural world and learn more about evolution, learn more and dig into the language and the writing of his time, even while staying engaged. And I think that's a question a lot of us are wrestling with. How much do we directly participate in politics? How much do we um, turn towards other aspects of life to find renewal and engagement? If you want to add more, great. There are other questions up as well. We'll take Wesley's comment, please. Thank you.
Okay, well, I was thinking about one observation first regarding as how much of a participant he was. They used to hide runaway slaves in Emerson's barn,
Mhm.
and Thoreau would take them to the railway station and send them to Canada. So he was actually more active than we suppose him to be. But the thing I was most interested in, because I was interested in his writings about forest succession,
Mhm.
because I lived by not by Walden Pond, but by Harvard Pond, where the Harvard Forest is, which was grown on what had been wheat land that had been completely cleared of trees. There wasn't a single tree on it when they started, the foresters. And as the forest grew, I'm thinking about the succession picture, is that they were trying to grow pine for apple boxes and peach boxes and so forth as a commercial enterprise. But the problem was, because of succession, of forest succession, what had been completely clear cut, as we can have our lives completely clear cut in a way that it didn't work, because what kept growing up was gradual succession to the hardwood trees that had been there, from the pine that they wanted to the hardwood trees. And it was a kind of a refusal of it was a different kind of a revolution, against what seemed to be entirely gone. And it kept persistently coming back, and they couldn't grub it out fast enough to grow the box trees that they wanted.
Hmm.
So it had to turn into a different kind of experiment, forest experiment. It was a revolution against, you drive nature out with a stick and it comes back. I don't know how relevant that is to what we're thinking about today, but I keep thinking about the things that we think are dead or gone or driven out or clear cut. Insist on coming back.
That strikes me as entirely relevant, Wesley. Thank you. Does anybody want to respond to that comment? Oh, Robin, then go ahead, please. Oh, you're muted, Robin, if you would.
There we go.
Thank you. No, perfect.
I love Wesley's take on all of that. And but my thought process was to go back to your comment, John, about the relevance of revolution right now. And I thought it was interesting that the Thoreau Society happened to choose today to make this presentation, as many of us are preparing to go out to protest, all over the country, a country that we have lost. Nikita, I didn't have any problem with that metaphor at all. Thoreau felt as though he lost his country, and we feel today as though we've lost our country. I've taken training on how to be a safety leader in Raleigh, and I'm heading off not to Philadelphia, but to a nearby, a closer venue. And people all over the country will be doing that in light of all of the ICE incidents this past week. So this entire presentation was so relevant to this particular day, and I wanted to thank you for that. Yeah, I'm enjoying all of it, and it's all interrelated, of course, and interconnected. But I wanted to make a comment on the fact how particularly relevant all of this is on this day. So thank you.
Thank you, Robin, and thanks for taking part. I think we all have parts to play. And I'm struck by Thoreau's example of civil disobedience and the sense of principle as a way of refusing to accept his country as lost. I mean, I think he's at a time when the country seemed, in his eyes, to fully endorse a war against Mexico, to expand slave territory, and all the various cruel legislations to enforce slave power in his lifetime. And he dies as the Civil War is really just unfurling. But he very clearly felt that an act of principled resistance was a way of saying, no, here's the country that I believe in. And I think a deep-rooted faith that would bring people around eventually, and maybe with a kind of slow succession of Forrest, as Wesley said, maybe with the kind of violence of John Brown. He entertained both possibilities, and I think the question is, what's the best path forward? And Thoreau doesn't give us one clear answer. But I think seeing the turn to Walden Pond in many ways also as a response to the Mexican-American War is germane. It was a very political act as well. And the July 4th date, he poo-pooed it sometimes, but was very clearly intentional. So very powerful.
John, can I say something really quick?
Please, absolutely.
Robin, I really appreciate you talking about that you're a leader and an organizer for the protests. And how this all came about to have. I looked at the map on No King's Day, and just I'm overwhelmed and overjoyed at the same time to even see as far off as Alaska, Homer, Alaska, in Hawaii, in Guam. I mean, we can go down and see dots all over on these protests. So I just wanted to give you a shout out. We're going to one too. We made signs, and the whole thing will be going to one shortly here too. And I just wanted to thank you for being part of that organization to organize, because we're not leaders or anything. We definitely are participators. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Here.
John?
Yeah.
Brian
Brian,
here.
please, yeah.
I don't know how to do the palm up, so.
Gotcha. Wonderful.
Just in response to Nikita's talk, I wanted to mention that the idea of emigration or exile involving a lot ongoing trauma and so on, that you know, it's natural that Thoreau wouldn't have considered exile as an option, as a move against an oppressive government, because partly because of his suspicion about travel per se, travel in general. I'm trying to, there's a poem of his that you can find in the collected poems where he has an image of a ship which travels to a distant land. And there's something that's growing in the hull of the ship. Maybe someone can remember this poem and what the image was, but it says maybe it's a borer or some kind of insect that's boring into the hull of the ship. And the poem argues that insect in the hull of the ship stays with you wherever you go. You know, so in a sense, your national identity is there with you, or your personal identity is with you, and traveling physical distances is not going to affect that at all. On the other hand, I would like to say, as a Canadian, and I don't know if Nikita and I are a couple of the few people not in the States right now able to demonstrate, but a move to Canada might be one option that some people have actually thought. And of course, we have 4 professors from Yale who have recently been hired at the University of Toronto.
Interesting. Worth keeping in mind, and certainly Thoreau was aware of exile and thinking about people who were traveling in exile, and thinking of his admiration of Kossuth, who traveled through Concord, and then all the Irish folks who he passed in his travels, who he found naturalizing quite effectively in the Concord woods, and kind of admired that. And Alex Therian, a Canadian immigrant to Concord who put down roots in nearby Lincoln. So he had a clear sense of how people can move, and how their sense of home might shift and change with trauma, and also ways of rebuilding past trauma and different possibilities.
Good to point that out. It's
It's
maybe not his choice, but
I think he would have been devastated to have had to been uprooted from his world, as so many people are and have been and continue to be. Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you. Are there other questions and comments? We've had lots to think about. We have a few more minutes until we're obligated to leave, but I don't mean to keep people away from other things that are going on. If we're through with our conversation for now, we'll pick it up again in due course.
John, can I ask a question for people to think about? Maybe they can can you hear me?
We can hear you.
There was even more trauma that happened to Thoreau up while he was. One was before he went in built the cabin and went into the Walden Pond. But that one was no one can really. All I know about it is that him and his brother were on the Merrimack, I think it was, river, and they had built a campfire and it got out of control, and anyway, it burnt a lot of forest in the Concord area, and he was it was enough of an experience that people even nicknamed him Burnt Woods. Called him Burnt Woods. Now that's got to be traumatizing. He's not a very old person. That's got to be traumatizing. And that could have been an impetus to be, hey, I want to go out into the woods by myself. I'm just throwing that out there. And then I would love for people to comment on it. And then that happened prior to that. But while he was in the woods, and Nikita, this might be something, I think it was you who had a slide that said a person finds when they're in exile, that's not how they have to come back into civilization, something to that effect. And while he was in the woods, that's when the poll tax guy caught him and said, hey, you need to pay your taxes. So that's while he's at Walden Cabin. So here's in exile, and then that happens, and it's not long after that happens that he comes out and ends his stay there. So just throwing that out for people to comment. And thank you everybody for attending. I didn't want to leave without saying that. And good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody want to pick up on Carol's comment?
He went to the woods. He says there's this cryptic business about why he went to the woods. And he went to the woods because he set the woods on fire. He was in exile to some extent, or rusticated, as they used to say when they sent you down from Harvard. He was rusticated by his fellow companions because he had set the forest on fire and went to the woods, which also there's an interesting book entirely called Black Walden about all the previous inhabitants that Thoreau mentions, or I should say Thoreau mentions, who lived in the woods prior to him. And so he went and he lived among the former slaves, where the former slaves had lived. They were gone by the time he got there. It's another interesting aspect.
And one refugee from an Irish veteran of Waterloo, he says too. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I think it was Edward Hoare who he was with and set fire to the Concord Woods by Fairhaven Bay. And as you say, it took a long time to live that down, but that became a source of strength for him too. He got to watch the woods regenerate after the fire, and he got a sense that, in fact, fire in the woods is part of how nature works. So that moment of loss is also a moment of revolution and his understanding of how nature goes through its own revolutions, but worth keeping in mind. Good. Is there one last question someone's dying to offer up? Going once, going twice. In which case, we'll wrap up here. And let me just thank all of you for joining us and thank for our presentations to Carolina and to Carol and to Nikita for joining us from across the country and across the world, and all of us for joining in to a really powerful conversation. I'll pick up on something Carol Maciel had said about Thoreau's efforts to rethink what family and succession means. And Rob McFarland talks in Underland about the importance of being a good ancestor. And I think that Thoreau's sense of someone who had no children, who in fact is a wonderful ancestor, one of those uncles who helps really reweave the social fabric in ways that make it all the tighter and that we still draw on today. Is a way of rethinking what it means to be part of the community, even if you're not choosing the path of marriage and children, to be part of this fabric of the world. And that's worth keeping in mind as we're trying to rethink what it means for us to engage in the world that very much needs all kinds of help in all kinds of ways. So thank you again for taking part in this conversation. It feels good for me to be part of this community. And as you choose to engage in your own communities in other ways, keep us in mind, and we hope to get to see you again very soon, either at the Thoreau Society annual gathering or other events that we have. Really wonderful talks, wonderful ideas. I can't thank you enough for being a part of our particular cluster of people trying to make the world better.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nikita. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.